that's an availability problem. So you have to weigh that risk, and that's not captured well, I don't think, anywhere in the STIG. It's definitely not anything you'll ever see from DISA, because they don't give a crap about performance, at least from what I know. So how do you do those things, right? So one off, don't implement this very specific STIG ID. This is the one that takes your auditing, uses the audit dispatcher to send your audit logs to syslog. I don't like that for so many reasons. One, obviously I've shown the overhead. Two, you're storing that data twice, right? Now the audit daemon, the audit daemon stores that data. It's going to rotate those files at possibly a faster time around, but the syslog will still store all that data. Now that's stored in, if you capture your journal D stuff too, it's stored in syslog, journal D, and audit D. You've now tripled potentially your space required to actually store that data. One thing I also don't like is the STIG wants you to carve up your disk in all these different partitions and separate that out. The audit daemon monitors for close to capacity. Now, a lot of bad things can happen when you fill up a VAR file system. And so I often don't even like to create a VAR log or a VAR log audit, because I don't want things to break when the file system fills up, because you can have a lot of negative consequences of that. So to me, I overload the functionality of the audit daemon to act as a mechanism for alert, right? Drop me in a single user mode rather than deleting critical data that I would want. So for me, it serves multiple purpose. Now, if you rely on syslog to do that, syslog uses log rotate, which runs once a day by default. So you're not getting that rotation. If the file starts growing because someone starts throwing a denial of service at you like this, and your audit logs are growing at megabytes, per minute, then, potentially you run out of space. Fan notify. I got a lot of gripes with fan notify, or FA policy. I know it's relatively new. I understand the purpose of it. It can serve a role, but there are many trivial ways still to bypass fan notify or FA policy. And you just can't ignore the cost of that. I also think, and I can't stress this enough, that HPSS, McAfee, RHEL is a pile of garbage. Straight up pile of garbage. There's a place for it, and it's not on most systems. Protect your systems properly instead of throwing this middleware in there and killing performance, creating its own vulnerabilities. These things are not, anytime you're throwing these third-party software in against something with Red Hat, that Red Hat's not particularly, at least to my knowledge, validating these things. Oh, well, how does this work with McAfee, right? Does this encounter, do you encounter issues with McAfee and Red Hat? You'll take whatever people might file as an issue, but it's not getting tested. Like, that's not part of the day in and day out releases for Red Hat software, is it?
I mean, my word when I talk about this is that most of the stuff that McAfee's looking for is not Linux-based.
Right.
So I always ask, why are you looking for issues that will never happen on this platform? The only reason I would go that way is if you're hosting files that other platforms that starts with W are using,
yep,
then it makes a lot of sense to have it running. But
we did, somebody at Red Hat years ago did an analysis of McAfee signatures that were loaded onto a Linux box, and it was actually looking for files that you would find on a Windows box. So it's like if you're not serving files to a Windows box, right, then what value is there? But if you are serving files to Windows box and you have malicious files on the Linux box that could be grabbed by Windows users, then it makes a lot of sense. Right? Because we can get rid of the malicious file before it gets to Windows. But if you're a Linux system and you look for Windows viruses,
I've heard a lot of people run their systems too in like an enclave kind of like setup, right? So coming from the HPC world, when you go into that supercomputer, right, you're inside of that supercomputer, you've got the login nodes or whatever, but protect the boundaries of that. I'm not saying not to protect the boundaries. Do a nice, thorough job on the boundaries, but once it's in, why put it on just because the policy says so? To me, traditional AV is completely antiquated thinking.
well, I know what's on, because that's the way they've done IT for the last 20 years, right? It's in part of the standard policy. And the only way to get really around that is to talk about compare the vulnerabilities that they're looking for to what's already in the system. And the few rootkits and stuff like that it was looking for can be fixed by a lot of the other stuff you mentioned. Much better.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's why it takes away. But it's just in the policy. This is the way we always done IT. This is what we mean by secure. And they don't necessarily have any say so whether that makes sense or not. Like, well, you're going. They're frustrated too, but they've been told to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I find a lot of people that do that, and they try to compensate in different ways. Actually, a program that I was helping out on, they actually isolate a lot of things down to a reduced set of CPUs that can be affected, right? But the problem is, going back to this, if this added latency just gets increased because McAfee takes extra long to do its scanning, then you pay that penalty right here in delays. So just by restricting the resources that McAfee and FA policy take might not solve these problems because they inject themselves in the middle. So more rambling. Auditing Linux is a bottleneck. Again, I'm not telling anybody anything new, right? It's a matter of balancing requirements. To me, I think the DoD does a very poor job, in general does a very poor job of understanding that you need to be able to make exceptions when there's a reason to, right? And you don't need the 10th degree when just because of that, right? You've got to be able to do that. Secondly, you kind of pointed out earlier, Ted, that a lot of the problems you see are from the file system. So this kind of is opposing that. And so again, I think you have to really balance that decision, right? If that's a big vulnerability, then you might want to take care before loosening up those logging of DAC failures. But I also think that if you're using like some useful EDR software, you might be able to relax your auditing and let the EDR software do some of the work for you when it comes to detecting those file system vulnerabilities. Honestly, I think eBPF is the correct way to implement a lot of that stuff for capturing it, but yet I couldn't go out there today and tell you the good solution for that. I have lots of ideas on how I can make that work. I have no idea if there's a product that does that way, but that's my general thought, is if you've got the audited daemon, leave that critical piece there for things that do matter. What's going in and altering the contents of the kernel, right? Did I load a module? Am I executing a privileged program? One that has with capabilities, not, so there's the ability to put extended attributes with trusted capabilities so that programs that actually run with privileges different than SUD and SGID, but still are dangerous, right? So I want to audit those thoroughly, right? I think that's should be the critical points that you're wanting to monitor and know what's happening on your system. This next one, I don't see a touchdown, and it causes me an enormous amount of pain dealing with it, but secure boot can be really great if you want to prevent persistence. And the kernel lockdown mode, I don't personally know of a way to compromise a kernel, even as root, off the top of my head anyways, when it's got kernel lockdown mode on. That's with me as root. And I spend a lot of time with this stuff, right? So I'm sure there's ways and documented ways for it. But when you use secure boot and you're using Red Hat, by default, it turns on kernel lockdown mode. And kernel lockdown mode restricts you from changes to PCI registers. You can't use different functionality. So you lose some functionality with it. But honestly, if you're worried about a secure system, that can do more for you, I think, than any combination of what we just discussed for the most part. And then I say use EDR. Years ago, I'd probably say never use EDR, but I've been convinced of the values of EDR. There's some enormous, so when you're in a big organization, you sort of ignore the trees, for the forest. That's always a gripe of mine, right? We compromise the security of the individual systems, or lessen the security of the individual systems for the whole enterprise. I think eBPF and EDR can actually give you a lot of that insight without putting those compromises there. Again, I don't have a EDR solution that I would recommend, but I know of a lot of the functionality. I've never looked closely at Red Canary, but there's I've looked at some of their blogs, and it seems to me like they're probably doing a lot of things the right way. but I'm certainly not advocating for them. I've never used it. I just from reading some of the information they put out. But don't let stuff tap into your kernel. I'm a big fan of keeping needless stuff out of your kernel, whether that's McAfee, whether that's the old way of using like carbon black, the big push and, well, I won't even talk about that. I won't talk about that push here, but there are other intrusive pushes to try and keep eyes on people, insiders and stuff like that, and those are very, very, very poor thought out. I've found all sorts of issues with those things. And, you know, so NIST SP 853 is the risk management framework, I believe. Push back when it degrades your performance and usability. So even though I said I wasn't, you know, not done here, I got a couple more slides, just a little bit more. I know, painful. So when I said, sorry, going back to this, reduce auditing of the pointless items, right? Okay, so if it's not pointless, I do think it's still a significant problem if your non-root users can create a denial of service fairly easy. And I actually didn't see this until I was just looking at this yesterday, but actually this STIG item is wrong when it comes to handling modules. Modules should be monitored regardless of what it goes in the kernel as on the attributes, so that should definitely change. But monitor those things where your effective user ID.
Use this. Is that, well, does everyone know how to read and install? Yeah. All right, cool. The good news is that RHEL 10 will have
Ah, that is awesome.
that will eliminate some of the
That will eliminate some rules and some of the overhead actually with it. But yeah, so I took out all those things that could be influenced sort of by the regular user, the extended attributes, the change mod, the change own, and stuff like that. Again, those may have applicability in places, but just to see if this bare bones sort of auditing framework where you're monitoring sort of the privilege programs and things that go in and out of the kernel could make the impact. So the one on top is no STIG. The one on the middle is the original STIG auditing I pointed out, where it has the auditing bottleneck. And then I just removed those rules and ran with the rules on this page. And again, because it's not hitting those rules, it's not consuming the bottleneck and your performance is back on par. So I do think there is stuff you can do to save yourself by keeping that audit daemon or the audit rules trimmed to the essentials. And then this is just roughly the performance look at it from the CPU utilization. And you can see between the top and bottom, even though there are two different runs, one with the semi-set of audit rules, they run roughly on par. So you get that performance back. So that's a good thing. So future work. I've got a lot of things that I've griped, and over the years, people get to listen to me complain about the STIG over and over again. Again, it's mostly if it comes down to manpower and performance loss. And for me, I got real work I'd like to be doing, so if I don't have to spend time arguing with our security paper pushers who don't really know or understand this stuff, the better off I am. But also don't make the burden heavy on systems. So let's do what makes sense. Let's look where it's merit, which of course does not coincide with the RMF framework. And that's why it's probably not done or ever going to change. But if you want to apply security and common sense, I would encourage you to do this kind of thing instead. I actually have a ton of Ansible, a Ansible playbook that has a ton of customization for RHEL 9, separate from the one that's put out by DISA. I'm not a particular fan of the one with DISA. It has its place, but I allow the customization where, and it makes a lot more sense in the way I had implemented it. I'm trying to get public release on that, and my government was kind enough to ignore me when I sent those emails. So since I was done on government time, if you work for a government organization, government contract, there's a good chance I could probably get that information or allow you, pass this on to you if you wanted to use it, but I have no ability to override, the government on that. And then what I was really hoping to have done for this, but I haven't, is a bunch of eBPF and BPF trace one-liners to sort of capture that. How do you go in your environment? So this sort of demonstrates a pathological bad case of the STIG, right? Not every environment's going to be a 50x performance hit. Most of them are probably going to be a 2 to 4x. To me, that's still unacceptable, but how do you measure that? How do you actually capture that information? So what I was hoping to do is put a little toolkit together, kind of like the BCC tools that exist out there for the BPF compiler collection or whatever it is for BPF, but focused on capturing the latency characteristics that all of the STIG changes induce in your environment. So I've got a bunch of one-liners and stuff like that, but I haven't formalized anything yet on that. I'd really hope to have that done, but I'm not even close for this. So finally, only you can prevent a dumpster fire. Don't let security recommendations destroy your system's performance. Any questions?
So to me, there's one area that it didn't seem further, and I'm not sure where it is going. So there are definitely things where we look at it from a vulnerability perspective, but there's also a sort of compliance security look at. So for instance, basically, so you can see afterwards who was on the system, what did what, so you can sort of trace back the change that we can identify.
So I think the RMF sort of categorizes things. The NIST document that the STIG is sort of, the controls that the NIST STIG is, or excuse me, that the STIG is trying to comply with. Those are areas that you really can't make these kind of exceptions in, right? So if you really need forensics, although I do think you could get a lot of that information still from BPF, today there's no way that I'm aware of to do it accurately without applying what's done here in the STIG, right? If you need to be able to trace that, to me, when I look at how I'm going to compromise a system, while I might be able to laterally move across users, fundamentally at some point, that transition from an unprivileged user to a privileged user is the key in all of this. Unless you're exploiting a security vulnerability, in which case then you just need a patch, because most of those things, yeah, the FA policy and McAfee are not going to save you from that, the 0 days. So, you know, that's my thoughts on it. It's all in the RMF. If you need to do it, you're going to have to do it because. But hopefully you can kind of separate your environment into performance-sensitive things and not, and make those exceptions necessary. So your systems, honestly, like I'm just dumbfounded when I go into a place and I look at how long it takes to just like log into a system. Like it's astounding to me. Like this is our taxpayer dollars that works. Like it really frustrates me. And my goal is always to make sure the systems, at least I have a control or say in, don't do that. So it's a real slow process, but I've been funneling information to my management for years now, trying to open people's eyes on a side that I don't ever see documented. So that's all I got.
And another one, you mentioned it in the middle that you found the FA policy, that it was fairly easy to circumvent. Can you give an example of that?
MemFDs. MemFDs, you walk right all over it. So there's some other stuff I have from McAfee, both in kernel and other. I won't detail those here. There are other ways to. So I'll just say this: if you look at the kernel code, right? If you're monitoring a specific interface to the kernel, right, and that's how you track events, look for things that the kernel does itself that bypasses those. And there are lots of ways to bypass.
I think one of the reasons behind FA policy was there was a real problem with people. Well, there was a demand for application latency, right? Make sure that only got certain applications going from certain areas of the operating system. You know, from a security perspective, home directories were always like the best playground on a
Right.
system. Because you could copy down your own file, you could mark it executable, you didn't have to worry about moving it to user bin or anything, and then you could recap it, you know, from your home directory.
Unless you're Linux access.
So you can put an FA policy statement that's like you can execute from home, right? And so that's what it's. I think that we're trying to, you know, use the wrong tool for the wrong purpose with that, right?
Yeah.
It's like the default policy that we have might be too deep of a policy for it, where we just need to like
Put some exceptions.
simplify what we wanted to do, which is make sure that people don't execute things out of areas where things shouldn't be executed from them.
Yeah. So I will say, you know, like when I started running some of this, you know, I would run it on like initially I started this work trying to just do it all in containers, right? But FA policy and McAfee are both sort of ignoring overlay FS. Or at least I think McAfee is too, but FA policy was definitely ignoring overlay FS with the default policy. So it actually didn't have a negative effect by doing an overlay FS for performance, that big performance hit. I mean, the auditing stuff is still there, but the FA policy hit wasn't there. So, and there are certainly a lot of nuances there, right? I mean, you've got the default policy there, you've got the RHEL default policy. Another thing I've seen is like, if you've got a busy enough system, it's easy to walk through the default cache on RHEL. I think it's like 65,000 entries or something like that by default. So it's really easy to walk through the cache, forcing it to have to reload and scan again. So. Yeah, I was using like Podman to run some stuff. What I was trying to do is sort of take some like base images. What I wanted to get for here was to sort of highlight the update times, right? I want to keep my software up to date. I want to keep my operating system up to date. What does that uptime look like with the penalty from FA policy and McAfee? I've captured some data on just the downright time it takes, but I haven't been able to capture sort of the in-between, right? So I didn't want to have to snapshot an image, reload the operating system just to do that a bunch of different times. So I was trying to be lazy with containers and do it. That's what I was.
Underneath Podman and Docker, the technology is basically the same. The difference is that Podman focuses more on security, make sure that you can run, like with Docker, when Podman first came out, you could only run containers with conditions. Right? Because why would you want to give the user like the ability to run other processes on other users? So with Podman, we want to lock that back down to where if you want to run, if you as an unprivileged user want to run a container, that container will not run as a privileged process or run as an unprivileged process. Right? Because we don't want you to like any additional privileges in the distributed container. I think Docker's kind of caught up with that now. But Stuart, really underlying technologies for this style. Okay. Yeah, I really forgot. I can specify. So I'm used to seeing it from the picture side. Okay. So I remember these requirements. But then what I was thinking was I remember just like I looked at it and purchased something else. Core OS? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and now containers and now you're Docker or something.
Well, so that was an incidental change. Even before that, when we basically set up a system that it didn't choke, it's basically like this pure overwhelm. Underneath the covers, H1C, or C1, depending on the language you write underneath it, everything is standardized. Doesn't matter whether it's a protocol or whether it's any other container. So even back in the 2 days, something referred to file. But by default, because everyone was talking about it, there wasn't Docker daemon on there. That now has been replaced with Podman, but all that does is get the system started. And then when it's running, it's gone. It's filed with it. And because the OS basically makes it non-fungible, yes, it's extremely simple to operate the OS. Push that without looking at there's a lot of things that from a security perspective I need to be mindful. So basically just say it on the thing. All what is required is Podman, you go. The difference is that after everything is in the middle, the way I Docker destroyed those licensing wise and made it kind of nonsensical to go that direction. That said, you build everything with Docker on your laptop, all that works, it still was not command container. It will run as that. So you can use all those tools in your local systems without really caring at all what runs in the container. So that's where you have to doing that. You might find that
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely.
Take a piece of privately assigned so as a user, like I run computers that start a whole system in a good laptop. Just I have some services at my disposal that will come in. It's small.
I can answer, but it's the same. There's a development on both sides. Early on, I didn't feel that security was that big thing.
No, everything was. I don't remember because we used to have to do a lot of work every quarter back when we used to go to my
I still have to talk about it and see, well, I want to expose 480. Why?
Yeah, exactly. And if you come back in 2 months, we'll be talking about OIF, which will be a lot of it will be ownership based. I made a career in this place.
I like this perspective is very unique to me. In most cases where I see security going on, it is literally saying, government, these are telling us to do X. And when you start highlighting some of those, what they might, the customer might highlight some of those, something that's not very, very welcome. The government says we have to do this.
Yeah.
Often you can say whatever you want after that. It doesn't matter. They just have to do it because they've been told to. That's been my frustrating here. This, I think, may open up the idea of, so we had more than 50% dependency on some of this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
if I have to buy twice or quadruple the amount of resources
Exactly.
to run the same thing, now there's money on the table. And typically we change it.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, like a lot of people know it slows things down, but I don't see a lot of data to show it. That actually hits on the biggest point to me, which I didn't accomplish here, but I was really hoping to get a bunch of like a little toolkit. So how could you monitor that in your environment? So you could characterize that. So you can go say to security, well, we're facing a 2 to 4x hit, right? You can't just take somebody else's data and drive the train with security usually, right? You got to apply it to your own environment. And so I do hope to hit on that eventually here. Like I said, I have a bunch of stuff in the works, but nothing finalized. So.
I did have another question with the, I guess you referenced as after you said something about logging. So, in the high performance computing environments that you were working in, I guess it makes sense to have individualized instances running, but I would have architected, or I would think that, especially in HPC, you would architect it such that the logs and things would be dynamically sized, would be running in the same place. But in that situation that you were working with, is that something that just wasn't done, or is that just not a standard practice?
So, I mean, a lot of people will apply some mechanism to sort of control logs and the size and everything like that. But on its own, the operating system left to it, to the default configuration is going to go in there and clean that up once a day. And so unless you know about the problem, unless it bites you, you may not be aware of that problem. So usually in HPC environments, this is not their first rodeo, right? They've got a very structured way for how they deploy things. I don't get to work typically like in behind those enclaves. I get stuck out on like the operational programs that are like trying to do stuff and have to meet with the operational people. And so we get stuck in this traditional route and you go to try to say something like this to them and it's like, well, yeah, but the STIG says you got to do this. Like, I know we have to do that. That says we have to do that, but here's why we're not going to do that, because it actually causes more problems than it solves, and we'll solve it this way, right? We're going to propose an alternate way. Right.
That's because the compliance is so square, basically.
Yep.
You have to write it like this. It doesn't matter. You can do better.
Yeah.
That's my frustration.
Yes, definitely.
It says to write a command like this, and then, but that's a stupid way of doing it, because it doesn't really turn everything on. But we're not allowed to.
And you know, when I go in and gripe, and Dissa hates me for this, but like to me, I look at, and I know this is a Red Hat document, right? Partially a Red Hat document, partially a Dissa document. It's the vendor who kind of gets to drive that train. But to me, if this is going to release it and it's the government work, the government should strive to have this to be the best document possible, right? Because the reach of that, you know, I mean, how many places go and accept the STIG even though they're not DoD? You know, I work for DOE, I work for FAA or something like that, and you're having to apply these same policies elsewhere, right? So it has you know, tentacles outside of just DoD, and that's why I think special care needs to be taken. Now, if I was Dissa, I'd be like, well, I don't have time to worry about everybody else. That would certainly be my excuse, but I would also want the best foot forward.
This stuff, I don't think it is way beyond government. There is a lot of the commercial industry working on it. We've got to do something, we can't just pretend it well.
Yeah.
If we're willfully behind, they don't have the right people that understand certain things. They want to adopt it. I don't think they're even at the level we're looking at here, where they can go, wow, there's a big difference between doing the way the document says and then doing it. They
Yeah.
just need to get something going where they can actually even just apply tips.
Yeah.
You know, just to begin stuff, that's new to them.
I mean, there's another aspect of it that I look at, like, you know, Red Hat rolled out, I don't know what the reasoning between moving to auth config to, or, you know, auth select, those changes, I don't know what drove that train, but part of me thinks it was the STIG, right? You know, and a more flexible tool. And like going in there and like destroying that format, you know, like that's one of my biggest gripes is you can make the STIG almost completely without even running those commands. But then you're going to go look at the output and you're going to say, oh, well, it doesn't say that PW history or PW quality has this, this, and this explicitly on the PAM line. Well, but it does read the file in etc security, you know, pwquality.conf. And if you can do it there without altering the operating system from the default, why not do it? So.
I will say this, you know, when we go from like L6 to L7, right? Or 7 to 8, 7 to 8 is probably the 7 introduced a lot of change. When we started the STIG process, we took the last version, and we're like, okay, let's rename it, and then we'll see what breaks, right? So when you look at things like audit, it hasn't changed since L5. It's probably due for some kind of scrutiny again. Where we look at it and be like, you know, are all these rules really needed? Because a lot of them are repetitious. And you see, like, where we're beginning to eliminate a lot of the base 32 stuff, right?
Yeah.
Where, because, you know, we can't install the last several major releases, but we can't install the 32-bit version anymore. It just doesn't even exist. But we still ship a 32-bit library, so we have to look at those 32-bit system calls. And, you know, it's like, is there anything we can eliminate?
Well,
Straight from the start. That isn't going to impact performance or security. We want to impact performance possibly, but not impact security. I think it's probably time for us to do that.
I mean, I think there's definitely, you're showing this, but it doesn't from good. I would never expect it to be a flat line, meaning that you can't see the consequence.
Yep.
But there's a humongous difference between, let's say, a 10 and 20% penalty to say 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
With that, I think, I don't know whether we can argue that the security is worth that penalty.
Right. The investment.
I think there's plenty of room to say, can we change the way it's done behind the scenes versus, to your point, maybe just think smarter and go in these rules where we find performance can be accomplished much better by thinking about.
Well, I think EPP, that's where eBPF can really solve a lot of the problems, because if you look at eBPF, it was originally to help with network processing, like, you know, writing your own firewall rules, right? So you're concerned about performance and packet processing and transactional throughput. You know, packet counts are, you know, much faster than file counts. POSIX locking is so much overhead compared to throwing a packet on the wire. So I really think, you know, eBPF is the grounds that could, you know, improve what's done with Audit E. altogether, right? Rethink it, use those performance maps instead of thinking in the traditional sense. I mean, I guess there's probably still always going to be a case where you need to flush that record out to disk, which I am not doing here, right? This is flushing it out in batches, right? But if you're going to flush it out in batches, you could use performance maps from eBPF and do that far more efficiently.
But that's part of the performance principle. In order for this to be working, you gotta have a record. Can't be sitting in memory in days that can be another one.
Right.
So you've got to send it out with a business network or something else when you have it. And that is a synchronous flight. And that's part of what service delivery is done.
Well, the recommendation today still is no longer using the synchronous stuff. I don't think. I don't believe the current RHEL 9. No. I mean the auditing piece of it, right? So your audit records aren't going to disk and being synced for every one of them, right? Obviously, I did mean to get this. I was going to try and get what the number of throughput that you can actually do. I think it's roughly around like 1,000 or something records per second. X number of times.
It will spit it out eventually, big misses and timeouts, but it will say, hey, this message came there 50 times, here's the message.
And this is probably something else that impacts like some performance, right? Is at Red Hat we always advocate for SE Linux to be a category 1. Turn SE Linux on. It needs to be on.
Yeah.
It's like the best security system in RHEL is SE Linux.
Right? Agree.
This always makes it
Cat 2.
at least in RHEL mandated Cat 2, right? We can sit there and advocate maybe, hey, look, if SE Linux is a Cat 1 and it's mandatory that runs, we can eliminate all of the open
Right.
auditing rules because SE Linux isn't going to let anybody open something that they're not going to open. And if they do open it, who cares? It doesn't become malicious.
As long as you didn't remember that you cannot have your user set for unconstrained. The problem is the default is the Linux is not for default.
Yeah.
Default is Linux is way too permissive because it basically says only the stuff I have rules for I'm gonna.
Right.
The targeted policy.
You can just do whatever you want to do. Right?
I,
If you don't change that, then
It's a system thing.
but the targeted policy in itself, I think, has done great strides for security. I mean, like, you can put a Red Hat system out there, and I mean, honestly, I can't think of anything glaring that worries me just putting a Red Hat system out right off the bat. Because as long as SE Linux was just, yeah.
most of the stuff that most people install in as a all that, the function as long as they target is installed. I was up in the cell systems yesterday, and I've got to see them wait because it's in the process of built for pretty much every package. So if that's done, but with adding your own stuff, or when people pull down, fit up things or whatever, all those are not necessarily. And the more misses or see people complaining about file management, you can't access the files. Because that's the first time they've ever seen this event before.
Yeah. I do feel like that's somewhat like, for a long time I didn't work in an environment where I had a lot of other users, and now I help out in an environment where I have a lot of users, and it's like users make a lot of dumb decisions, right? And it's everything just gets chmod 777, and then they still complain because they don't have permissions. Like, well, we use root squash on the NAS, so you don't have access to that. Like, it's just those kind of things. Like, I wish there was an easier way. I mean, I know there's SE troubleshoot, right? But even then, like, sometimes users just can't get past the simple DAC stuff.
I had a situation where in fact in a while where they basically went in the folder to folder, we have 777 on the file, it was exposed, and I go, check that essentially. Like, because to me that's the old, very, very old business that understands security, but it's like, if it doesn't work, just give me full access.
Right. I don't have wireless, but one of the things I had presented at, well, I probably do have wireless, but I don't have it turned on. Anyways, so like on my GitHub page, I've got this eBPF program. I have such a problem with users creating things as 777 that I wrote an eBPF program to do two things. One is, and this is stuff that you can't easily do really without eBPF, but like when a program is executed and that program was executed and it's world writable, it gives me a flag that it was executed and it's world writable. It also tells me when someone chmodded a file to have the right bit on other, right? So that I know, I mean, it could be world writable, it could be other, but it's like those two things are like really helpful in sort of going point the finger at people. Like it's like an essential thing, but it's actually not a basic component really of the operating system. But we have so many problems from whether it be DAC or Mac related issues that people just, that's their first default, 777. Yeah.
Like giving your web server full write access to files that you know well. How do you do that?
Right.
But it's easy.
We're coming up on 11.
All right.
Great job, Jeremy.
Thanks.
Good job.
Thank you.
I'm going to spend minutes on it.
I'd like to know, so I've been looking into remote workers actually, and OpenStack, yeah, and well because
So we rolled it out.